आप में से बहुत सारे लोग SaaS बिजनेस बना रहे होंगे, लेकिन आप में से कितने सारे लोगों ने प्रोडक्ट लेड ग्रोथ के बारे में सुना है? प्रोडक्ट लेड ग्रोथ इज बेसिकली अ वे टू मोनेटाइज योर SaaS बिजनेस इन विच योर प्रोडक्ट ऑटोमेटिकली अपसेल्स इटसेल्फ। सुनने में काफी कॉम्प्लिकेटेड लगता है, लेकिन है नहीं, और आप अपने प्रोडक्ट में ऐसे लीवर्स लगा सकते। पर मैं प्रोडक्ट लेड ग्रोथ के बारे में क्यों बात कर रहा हूं? क्योंकि आज हमारे जो गेस्ट हैं वो एक ऐसी कंपनी के फाउंडर हैं जो कि आपके SaaS बिजनेस को टॉप लाइन दिलाने में मदद कर, और उनकी कंपनी का नाम टॉपलाइन है। टॉपलाइन एक ऐसी कंपनी है जो कि प्रोडक्ट लेड ग्रोथ का इस्तेमाल करके आपके SaaS बिजनेस को मोनेटाइज करने की कैपेबिलिटी देती है, यानी कि आपके टॉप लाइन को ऐड करती है। इट्स अ कंपनी जिसमें हाल ही में सेक्वा ने पैसा डाला है। दे जस्ट रेज्ड अ फंडिंग ऑफ अराउंड $20 million। रुचिन जो आज हमारे गेस्ट हैं, ही हैज हैड एन इलस्ट्रियस करियर एज अ कंसल्टेंट। इनसे पहले वो मैकेंजी में थे, उसके बाद वो सेक्वा में गए जहां पे वो वेंचर कैपिटलिस्ट का भी काम किया, और उसके बाद उन्होंने ये बिजनेस चालू किया है। सो आज के एपिसोड में हम रुचिन के साथ SaaS बिजनेस के फाउंडेशंस के बारे में बात करेंगे। ये समझने की कोशिश करेंगे कि SaaS बिजनेस में कैसी दिक्कतें आती हैं और उसको मोनेटाइज करने की कैसी अपॉर्चुनिटीज होती हैं, एंड हाउ डज प्रोडक्ट लेड ग्रोथ हेल्प इन दैट। इस एपिसोड को पूरा एंड तक देखिएगा, बिकॉज इसमें एक बहुत सारे ऐसी चीजों को हमने बेसिक से टैकल किया है जो कि एक SaaS फाउंडर के लिए बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट होती हैं। और कमेंट सेक्शन में डेफिनेटली बताइएगा कि आपके टेकअवेज क्या हैं, बिकॉज डॉक्यूमेंट करना अगर आपने मिस किया तो फिर आपके टेकअवेज मिस हो जाएंगे। सो हियर वी गो। First of all, welcome, Ruchin. We'll probably start off with the whole idea of product-led growth. You know, a lot of people who are building who are in the early stage of building SaaS products, many a times do not have clarity on the go-to-market. And I think product-led growth is one of those areas which a lot of people actually unwittingly do it, but since they don't understand how exactly, what are the best practices, how exactly to go about it, probably they are not able to optimize for the right kind of growth and revenue. So first of all, want to touch a little bit about SaaS companies in general, and in general, what are the kind of trends in terms of the go-to-market that a usual SaaS company has, and what basically makes product-led growth different, a notch above the others?
Yeah, no, great question. And maybe we can actually dial back about 20 years, right? Because it's really a journey to understand how the world is becoming product-led. We first need to understand where the world is coming from, right? So let's go back to sort of the early 2000s. We're sort of in the era of largely on-prem software, and cloud is sort of coming up. And sort of the motion at that point in time was essentially sales teams whining and dining and eventually closing $1 million contracts. And if you're closing $1 million contracts, you have to sort of focus on the top Fortune 500s or the top sort of Fortune 1000 enterprises. And that was the motion for most SaaS companies, right? Now, in such a world, the sales team was sort of the central entity at most SaaS companies, because that's the company that drove revenue and the business forward. And a lot of tooling sort of came up around these companies. And the biggest example of that is Salesforce. So they essentially took the CRM and they put it up on the cloud instead of on-prem. So 2000s was really the era of sales-led growth, where sales teams, based on their Rolodex, their relationships, and their network, would essentially find customers and sell to them. And because they're sort of highly paid sales teams, they have to be closing sort of 6 or 7 figure deals, right? So large 6-figure and 7-figure plus deals. And that was the sales-led era. So you're looking at largely software that's being sold to CXOs and VPs and the likes. But then in came sort of Google, which sort of hit scale through the 2000s, and 2010 was becoming a monopoly of online search and intent. And SaaS businesses eventually found out that, hey, you don't need to serve the CXOs or the VPs. You can actually go mid-funnel and go after the directors or sort of the senior developers and the likes. And the way you get to them is essentially by advertising against keywords they search for on search engines, right? And that was sort of the inbound marketing era, which followed in the 2010s, where it's very simple what you would do. You would run an ad against, let's say you're a help desk software. People are searching for help desk softwares because demand already exists. So you put sort of an ad against help desk as a keyword, and then demand comes to you. And suddenly you're not sort of functioning in a world of a few hundred leads, like you would in the sales-led world. You're now focused, you're sort of functioning in the world of a few thousand leads every single month. And that created sort of the inbound marketing revolution, on top of which HubSpot was built, right? And the marketing team actually became very critical, because that's the team that created the top of the funnel for the sales team to then later sell into. So the marketing team became the throttle on growth, and the sales team became the closer. And the inbound marketing revolution created a lot of companies. There's the entire MarTech stack that a lot of you who are familiar with SaaS might be familiar with, which is tens of thousands of companies essentially serving marketers as a persona. And that was the inbound marketing era, right? Which essentially sold into mid-funnel. There was a demo. Post-demo, the lead was sent into sales, and then sales went in and closed, and suddenly you have like a 10 or 20 or $30,000 contract. That kind of brings us into the 2020s, into the product-led era, which is sort of the world that we service, right? Where you're no longer, as a business, selling to a mid or a high, sort of mid-layer or sort of top-tier person in the hierarchy, right? You're going after the employee who actually uses your product. So think about Postman. Postman does not service or go after the director of engineering or the VP of engineering or the CTO. The point of Postman is to go after the software developer who actually uses Postman to test APIs, right? The point of Canva is to go after the person actually creating designs. The point of Figma is to go after the person who's actually designing, which is a product designer. And software is no longer sold to sort of VPs and CXOs and corner offices of ivory towers. It's now sold to sort of the folks in the trenches who are actually doing the real work. And that's where the product-led era comes in, where now you're not sort of dealing with a universe of a few thousand leads a month. You're dealing with millions and millions of users. Now, the moment you're dealing with a sample space of like 1 million users, your software has to be hyper consumerized, right? Because these are folks who are using Uber to get to work, ordering food on a DoorDash or a Swiggy, and that's the experience you're used to. So to sort of serve the product-led world, you have to have a hyper-consumerized experience, which means it needs to be self-serve. You can't have a human in the loop. It has to be freemium so that folks can see value from your product before you sell to them. And that's kind of the motion these companies essentially enable, right? Which is get people into the product, get them using it, show them some value, and eventually sell to a small subsection of them, where the premium plan might sort of serve, right? So that's the product-led world, which is, it's no longer the marketer or the sales team that is the throttle on your growth. Your growth is driven by the product itself. Right, in the adoption of it, the way you can sort of build virality or virality loops into it, the way you can sort of have referral loops running where you or I sort of invite our colleagues to use this product as well, and so on. So that's kind of the product-led world.
This is absolutely, I think it's a very good the trajectory that you've shown is basically the way things have gone. I have a few questions, which probably one more level down that we can go. So when you're saying hyper consumerized, so are we looking at only the SaaS products which are B2C, or are we looking at B2B companies as well? Because, for example, Salesforce or a CleverTap or Darwinbox will still do a B2B sale.
Yes.
Probably a Canva is still a B2C company because they have an individual as their end user. But for example, ChargeBee, which is a product which is used by companies, but still it is, the overall product is more individual based. So how do you categorize these companies then?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And the net answer is all of these teams still exist. So there's still a B2B sales world. There's still an enterprise sale being made at some point in time. It's just where you generate top of funnel, right? So in the sales-led world, sales was the team that generated top of funnel through outbound network, Rolodexes, and so on. In the marketing-led world, it was marketing team sort of that generated top of funnel, and the way they did that is through paid marketing, essentially. In the product-led world, it's just, when we say it's product-led, that just means the product is the one, is the entity or the team that generates top of funnel and gets folks through. Now, the way you convert them or the way you actually monetize against them is actually it's a cornucopia of multiple channels, right? So you have a sales team who sort of goes after enterprise accounts. So let's say you are Figma as an example, right? And you have someone from Netflix, a product designer from Netflix coming in. The product's first job is to get this person to some form of value where they've designed something, exported a design, so on. The second, but Figma is essentially a collaboration software. So the value is actually in collaborating. So it's the product's job to then get this person to invite his or her colleague, which is another designer or a third designer or fourth designer. Once you're at a critical mass, you can actually make a sale to this person. And you can do that through multiple ways. You can have a mid-market team going after them, but given your Netflix, you can actually have an enterprise sales team actually go after that. The only difference between the sales-led or marketing-led world and the product-led world is that the sale is much quicker and much easier because your user has, or sort of your buyer has fundamentally seen value from your product already. So often these sales teams at these companies essentially just go in and close. There's no longer a need to make a sale or to sort of prove value. So product-led growth is essentially a lever for creating top of funnel. How you convert that into bottom of funnel is actually a bunch of things which are borrowed from sort of the older worlds of sales and marketing-led growth, right? That's kind of how we think about it. So companies that use us essentially work with a bunch of channels. So let me take the example of Datadog. At IPO, a large chunk of Datadog's revenue is actually self-serve, right? If I'm not mistaken, it was upwards of 60 or 70% of their revenue is essentially people putting their own card on file. Datadog is a infrastructure monitoring software. So it's not as consumer as something like Canva, yet most of their revenue is self-serve. However, over the last few years in the public markets, Datadog now sort of gets 60 or sort of 70 or 80% of their revenue from enterprise sales. Or sort of 6 or 7 figure deals, right? So the motion has kind of flipped to essentially serving these massive enterprises. But the way these enterprises got into using Datadog was actually at the lower end of the spectrum, where someone from the developer team essentially started using Datadog, made it a viral entity within that team, and eventually it was sold into a larger contract, right? And what Datadog has very brilliantly done through that process is that their CAC is near zero for any of these 6 or 7 figure deals. And that's why product-led growth is very interesting. It does not mean the death of a sales team or the death of a marketing team. It's just that these teams operate in much more efficient, capital-efficient ways, right? That's kind of where product-led growth becomes beautiful.
Got it. So basically, it's like sampling. You've already tried it out. You know how it works. Now it's about all the top tier features that are required. Now you can't live without the product. Now your team has gotten used to using it.
Exactly. The sale has already been made. The sales team job is now to just close. And if you see sort of product-led companies and their counterparts, which are not product-led, the sales cycles for product-led companies are significantly shorter, where often these companies close like $50,000, $100,000 deals in just weeks, versus sort of it taking other companies which are sales or marketing-led several months, if not quarters, right? Because your ultimate buyer has already seen value from the product. They're locked into the sort of platform in and of itself. And they've already worked out the ROI because they've seen value. Their teams are using it. They know how much sort of time they save or how much revenue they generate through your particular product. And therefore the sale is already made. So it's a much easier and more efficient motion. It almost makes sense where why should you sort of get someone to pay you upfront? And then show them value later on. Isn't it much easier to just show value and then charge whatever you want at the end?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Ruchin, now that brings me to the question, what does TopLyne do and how does it do it?
Yeah, what we do is very simple. So if you consider a product-led company, the one thing they're very, very good at is acquisition of users and customers, right? So it's almost like acquisition is no longer a problem. Acquisition is free. However, what product-led companies sort of really struggle with is converting users into paid contracts. Because these companies often have a 1 or 2% conversion rate, if not lower. So if you're to sort of just throw a dart at a board, you're only going to hit it 1 or 2% of times, right? So we as TopLyne essentially just help these companies, figure out which of their millions of users are actually going to pay them. And I'll come to how we do that. But we essentially say that, okay, of your millions of users, these are the 10,000 that really matter. Have your sales, marketing, customer success, etc. teams focus on these users. And the second is we help them orchestrate on their go-to-market strategy, right? So they can say that, okay, for the highest intent users, send the sales team after them. And we'll help them sort of move leads into Salesforce or HubSpot or where the sales team works. You can say that, hey, if someone is on the fence, and TopLyne will tell you that, hey, these are the set of users who are on the fence, maybe send them an email marketing campaign to get them warmed up and eventually send a sales team into them. So that's kind of what we do. We help PLG companies figure out which of their users are going to pay. And the second is we actually help them increase their conversion rates by sending the right team after the right lead at the right time. The way we do the first, which is identification of leads, is an unfair advantage most product-led companies have, which is their users are already using the product, right? Like their potential customers are already using the product. And therefore, I'm tracking every click, I'm tracking every time you move a mouse. And that is a massive leading indicator as to if you're going to convert or not. So essentially, we train a bunch of complex data science models on a lot of click stream data. So data stored in an amplitude or a mix panel, or in India, Clever Tap. And we essentially make predictions as to if someone's going to pay or not based on the usage that they have shown within the product, right? So that's kind of the short 2 cents. We help PLG companies monetize free user base.
So you basically scour through the data and you figure out which one of the users or which segments of users are most likely to convert into premium users based on whatever historical data, whatever data already tells that this is the kind of user base. So you basically find a lookalike audience and then
exactly right.
then expand and then expand and then expand.
Yeah,
So
that's exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. Let's take the example of Zoom, which we're on right now. It's a PLG company. Now, let's say that I largely work out of Slack or Slack huddles, right? And Zoom is something I touch once a day, maybe for a meeting or two. But you, on the other hand, derive a lot of value from Zoom because you run a podcast on Zoom, and you might sort of have multiple touch points. So your usage of Zoom is going to look very different from my usage of Zoom. The number of people who attend your meetings will look very different, and that's something that Zoom tracks. The number of meetings you create and you're the host in will be very different than myself. And therefore, if you look at my product usage versus your product usage data, it will be very clear. It'll be chalk and cheese as to who's going to pay for Zoom one day or another, right? Now it's a whole different question that I do pay for Zoom, but product usage data is sort of a very strong indicator as to if someone's going to convert or not. It's almost like seeing them use the product and saying, hey, that seems like someone who's going to pay.
Yeah. You people started less than 2 years back, if I understand correctly. June?
Yeah, it's been on June 1st, it'll be 1 year. So we are just under 1 year.
And you already have, I mean, you have, can you name a few of the top clients that you're already working with?
Yeah, so we're working with the likes of Canva, which a few of you may be familiar with. Grafana, which some of you who are developers might be familiar with. Browser Stack from India, and it's essentially a cross-geo browser testing company. We're also working with GatherTown, which is a Series B, C company in the US, which primarily supports sort of a remote work use case, right? And a few others. So I can go on, but Canva, Browser Stack, and the likes are probably the more recognizable logos we work with. We also have a self-serve product coming out soon. So hopefully this list will massively increase, and we will be product-led ourselves maybe in a quarter.
So basically less than 1 year old, you already have, this is your second round that you're raising, and with the likes of Tiger Global and Sequoia already behind you, it kind of shows validation, at least from, from a credibility standpoint, that, hey, you people are doing something right? And I'm assuming that since you yourself are a SaaS company, then the growth trajectory is going to be the hockey stick that everybody anticipates. So currently, do you people have a plug and play model, or do you basically have to send a team to kind of onboard your client and all?
Yeah, so it's completely plug and play. This is something that we had decided day one, where we will not do anything custom. We will not have an implementation timeline and so on. So the only thing you need to do as a customer of ours is just give us access to your product analytics data, which is normally stored in something like an amplitude, mixed panel segment, or Clever Tap. For you, it's a simple SSO login. Or an API key share. So you essentially just type in your username and password, and then you're good to go. There's nothing else from your end. And that's essentially where a lot of our IP is built, where we're able to set up this environment and this propensity model for you without any intervention from your end. So if you're a PLG company and you're someone who is sort of working on revenue or growth at one of these companies, you don't need any engineering bandwidth from your end. You don't need any sort of product data science bandwidth. Everything is sort of plug and play. We have been doing this with a few enterprise customers early days, just to one, prove to ourselves that a lot of this works, and also sort of make sure it works at scale. But what we're most excited about is working with young companies such as ourselves. And the only way you can do that is in a self-serve manner. So you cannot have a implementation team or a time or sort of humans going after customers and onboarding them. So it was very clear to us from day one that this has to be plug and play, and this has to be entirely self-serve. And hopefully in a few days that will come to fruition, where we'll start onboarding our first few self-serve customers. And then in a few months, it will just be completely free to use and in general availability.
One last question before I open it up for the audience, and audience already have started raising hands. So guys, anybody of you want to ask questions, just raise your hand. We'll bring you on the deck one by one. And please keep your videos on so that we can see you as well. So Ruchin, you were a part of the search program, right? How was your experience like? What were the key learnings, and how do you think a search founder is better equipped to handle the market than the others? What is the unfair advantage that search provides?
Yeah, that's a great question. One, it was a great experience. So of course, I was previous to starting TopLyne, I was at Sequoia, so I'm a bit familiar with the search program, sort of coming into it. But it was an amazing experience, and there's a bunch of things that stand out. But by and far, the largest thing that stands out is the access to other founders and other teams that are sort of at the top of their game, right? The second thing that stood out to me was essentially the amount of learnings that you can have from folks not working on the same thing as you. So that does not need to be a SaaS company or a SaaS founder. It could be someone working in edtech. But a lot of their learnings from, let's say, building distribution in edtech could actually be very applicable to you. Like for us, content strategy and social media strategy has been a large proponent of our growth and sort of our inbound lead funnel, right? And learning from a few founders at Surge as to how they sort of generate sort of millions in top of funnel when they're sort of dealing with edtech companies and students was actually a massive unlock for us, where we have taken away a lot in terms of how these teams run their content, how these teams leverage it across platforms. So we essentially write content, but there's a lot of mediums such as podcasts, which is audio, video, and so on, that we can actually expand our distribution base. But learning it from folks who are actually doing it at scale and seeing real results has been sort of game changing for us. So for me, Surge is of course about a lot of competitive advantages you get in terms of access to experts, access to folks who have been there, done that. But by and far, it's actually talking to the other founders who are in a similar stage as you, where you can teach them something that you have learned over the last few years, and they can teach you something that they have sort of figured out, right? So there's a lot of allied learnings where the game is not zero sum. Right? The game is massively positive sum if you know sort of who to talk to, and sort of what to ask them. Right? So that was my takeaway from Search.
Yeah, it's a valid point. I believe as an entrepreneur, one of the biggest issues is that, I always say this, that you don't have a boss. You basically are on your own, and you basically are just fumbling through the dark trying to find the switch. And if there are people who have already found the switch, it becomes easier for you to get the right directions. Otherwise, you operate on a hypothesis and then experimentation kind of a format, and it saves a lot of time and money and headache to actually know.
I couldn't agree more. That's a great articulation. It's something I learned at McKinsey, where we essentially went into McKinsey as early analysts. You're like 21, and you're essentially dealing with folks in their mid to late 40s and 50s who've been there, done that for a large period of time, and trying to sort of essentially say that, hey, I'm going to teach you something new about your business and how to run it, right? Which is kind of a difficult sell. So what do you really do? You tap into everyone else around you who's actually which is a plethora of knowledge that already exists as to how to do something. So the number one learning we were taught at McKinsey, or something that we took away, was that most problems have actually been solved, and you as an individual don't need to resolve or sort of reinvent the wheel every time. All you need to do is find the person who solved that problem and maybe edit the sort of solution to your own context, because business context keeps changing, but solutions largely look similar. And that applies to founders as well, where if you are facing a problem, it's highly unlikely no one else has sort of solved it before. So your job should actually not be to reinvent the wheel with your team and waste a lot of bandwidth, time, and of course money. It should be to find the other teams that have actually solved this, chat with them, learn from them, and maybe give something back as well, where I'm sure they're searching for problems that you've solved. And that way everyone saves a bunch of time and better companies are built. So yeah, a lot of learnings from past roles have sort of worked in, which have really sort of helped us in our early journey of founding a company, right?
So I think Shikhar has had his hand up for some time. Shikhar, I'll just bring you on. Shikhar, how's it going?
It's going great. I had a quick question for Ruchin sir. So I'm building a SaaS product for restaurants and street food vendors. So I wanted to ask a question that what do investors see in a SaaS company, and how hard it is to raise fund at an idea stage?
Yeah, no, great question. One, what do investors look for? At least in early stage companies which are pre-product, it's primarily the team. It's entirely based on the founding team, your previous experience in this particular market, which is actually very relevant in SaaS. So you need to have been there and really understand the pain points of this particular user or sort of customer that you're going after. So you need to have a differentiated insight about, let's say in this example, restaurants, right? So that's the first thing that an investor would look for. The second would be sort of prior experience in building teams, prior experience in sales, product, and the likes. But I would say that pre-product and early stage, it's entirely on the founding team, their credibility, and one or two unique insights that really separate you from the rest of the market who might be competing with you, right? So that's kind of what investors are looking for. In terms of your second question about capital raising, it completely depends on, frankly, market cycles, right? Investors are not sort of they're not above the market. The market sort of defines the tide, and you move along with the tide, right? So the pricing in the market, the valuations are something that the market commands, and you decide whether you want to sort of partake or not. So if you would ask me this question last year, it was quite simple to raise for most companies, and the capital was sort of very freely available, with sort of the Fed printing a lot of money in the US and that money sort of flowing through to the rest of the world. But this year is a different case. 2022 is not 2021, and it is a lot more difficult to raise capital, and that's good and bad. One, it's great that sort of the companies that will get funded would get funded on very strong principles and fundamentals, and therefore better companies will be built through this year, I'm sure, than sort of were founded or sort of funded last year. But the second is it's significantly more difficult as a founding team to raise capital in this market. So it's going to be an uphill journey for many teams in that way. So investors follow the market when it comes to capital deployment. And I would say that 2022 is a difficult market in general. So that's my short 2 cents. I hope that answered your question. Happy to jump.
Yes, really. Thank you.
Ruchin, what do you think is the role of an advisor in a startup? Because one of the bigger policies, and a lot of people look for mentorship, so to speak, and it's a very weird conundrum that mentor, you can't basically find a mentor formally,
Yeah.
it's a very what do you call it, individualistic kind of an approach when it comes to mentorship, and also finding the right people. Not every person might be the right mentor for you or for your startup. I wanted to take your take on it and also understand the role and who are the advisors that you people have and how are they adding value to your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So to me, the role of an advisor is pretty clear. As a founding team, most of your time goes into actually building the business. So you are so I mean, maybe at a later stage it changes and you're a little sort of removed from the business where you can think at a more macro level. But in the early stages, you're essentially deep into the business, right? Where your contact with the outside world is limited. So you, as an advisor, I think there's two jobs that you have. One, staying in touch with what is external to this particular company in the current market. So let's say that, hey, what is the fundraising environment looking like? What are competitors doing? Where is sort of the market moving for us? And as an example, in terms of product-led growth. So basically, what is the state of the market outside of this particular company that you're advising? Right? That's number one. Number two, because founders don't have enough time to sort of really sit and think ahead and inform themselves, your job as an advisor is to figure out where the puck is going to be 1 to 5 years from today, and advise the founders, or sort of just provide them this insight that, hey, this is where I think the world is moving, right? And the founder can then sort of, I'm sure many founders already have a guess of where the world is moving, but to hear it from a secondary source is kind of validation, and they can sort of seek this advice from multiple folks, right? So to me, an advisor is very simple. What is the market looking like outside of sort of the bounds or the sort of walls of this particular company that you're advising? And second, where is the puck going to be a few years from now? That's really the job. Everything else, frankly, teams at companies should be better than you are sort of doing, right? Because they're sort of building the business. But you can sort of be sort of the be all and end all of everything outside of this particular business. The second question you asked is, who do we look at in terms of advisors? There are a bunch of folks. All of our investors who we have known from our time in Sequoia have been super helpful, right? So anyone like Rajan or Shailendra, Ashish, Tejashwi or TJ from Sequoia, these are folks we have worked with in the past and who we find ourselves going back to at all points in time. Made be decisions as to may be business decisions in terms of product, but also in terms of sales, marketing, but also in terms of capital raising and so on. We've also found our way into a few advisors through the route of our customers, right? So one of the few folks who has been really helpful is now the head of revenue at Canva. His name is David Burson. So he has been super helpful in just helping us understand how PLG teams operate, and also in terms of really nailing down our ICP when we should be hiring for certain positions versus not. So we've actually found a lot of support in the ecosystem of customers that we serve. But Dave is a shining example of that.
Guys, if you have a question, just raise your hand. Kamal has again raised his hand.
So I just wanted to understand that, okay, I understood that you guys help companies in the PLG stage. Okay. So I just wanted to understand, the first question was, how do you guys, go for a revenue model? Like, is it a subscription based, or you go per lead, or, is there a credit based system? And the second question, what I wanted to ask, like, so let's say a company, as a SaaS company, building an early stage product, right? At the early stage, maybe they could incorporate TopLyne. As we progress in the journey, like, product might change a little bit, right? There's always been, like, iterations happening continuously, right? So how does TopLyne, kind of incorporate this kind of changes in their, like, in the model of, generating the leads and conversion rates? Yeah. Thank you.
Great question. So maybe I'll answer the second one first. As a business scales, products change all the time. Frankly, there's usually pull requests every single day, right? So there's some usage that changes every day based on things you put out there. So in terms of how we adapt to that, we essentially run real-time data streams into ourselves. And the models, or sort of the propensity models we train in the background, are retrained at a very regular basis, right? So it's not every day, because you don't want things changing every day in your business, but at a weekly level, we sort of retrain a lot of the data science models we built in the background. So as the usage of your customers changes, or the way they interact with different features changes, our sort of predictions as to how they convert also change. So that's kind of how we adapt to massive sort of not massive, but incremental increases in product, right? To answer your first question about pricing, we price based on a usage-based model. Now we're an early stage company, and pricing is something you figure out over a period of time. So I wouldn't be surprised if our pricing model changes or sort of is different for different scales of usage. But for us early customers who are largely sort of, let's say, Series C onwards, SaaS companies operating at scale, it's based on usage. So the more top of funnel you generate, the more you sort of our contract grows with you and so on. So we grow along with your business. And eventually we want to get to a point where we charge as a percentage of revenue uplift that we generate. Right now, it's attribution is always a problem when it comes to something like this. So it's a much more difficult problem to solve than most people think. But we want to get to a world eventually where we charge as a basis of uplift we generate, and therefore our incentives are entirely aligned. Where, hey, we help you grow revenue, and therefore we get paid on that basis. But as of now, it's based on usage, which is the number of net new users you get every single month, right?
Thank you.
You have been an investor yourself. Now you're a founder. People are saying that that winter is coming in the VC ecosystem. How do you see it? And how do you see it playing out? Because you have seen these cycles before, and this seems to be another one of them. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm completely in agreement. Times don't look good. It's going to get tough. There's a very, very high likelihood that the US goes into recession this year, and then the rest of the world follows. That would be my guess. I hope I'm wrong. But yeah, capital availability is limited. The Fed will likely increase interest rates several times this year, and any 1% increase in interest rate normally creates a significantly larger reduction in asset prices across the board, right? Especially in growth stage equities. So all of that is going to filter down into the VC market. It's going to be tougher for tools that are nice to haves versus something like infrastructure. Churn will increase. You'll have to work along with customers to limit churn. So that's kind of how it would look like for a SaaS company. But all is not doom and gloom. Because these cycles the world sees these cycles every 10 or 15 years, and we come out of it every time, and the world is healthier post, right? So I would say that it's often at the height of a bull cycle, you always think that, hey, everything looks great, and it does not, because a bear cycle is coming. And at the sort of bottom of a bear cycle, everything looks like it's going to be terrible for a long time, but sort of the horizon is right around the corner. So I would say that don't fret. As a founder, your job is to, one, survive at the bare minimum through the bear cycle, and second, set yourself up to thrive at the end of it or through. Right, which means conserve capital, don't make obscene bets, or don't make obscene bets on burn and marketing and so on. Survive and thrive, and make sure that your customers are better off using you versus not, and things will look good on the other end of it. Now it's tough to say when the markets come back. That's anyone's guess, and I wouldn't pretend to know that, but my 2 cents would be that the world is going to probably get a little tougher, but better companies are born through these cycles. So if you look at 2001, what we got out of that was the likes of Google or an Amazon, right? And they became sort of the $1 trillion businesses of our world today. Even through 2008, a lot of very interesting fintech companies were born out of that crisis, right? And the same would apply with this as well. I'm sure a lot of super high quality companies will be born through this market, would build businesses based on fundamentals, and will build quality businesses which can sort of scale and be profitable and so on. So I would focus on that and not much else. So one, bare minimum is survive, and the second is set yourself up to thrive.
Ruchin, but the more I talk with you, I think there are so many more topics that we should talk about. One small thing, and then we'll call it we'll draw it to a close. What a lot of people are saying that while the VC ecosystem is dying, the crypto VC ecosystem might actually thrive at this point in time. What do you think? Because a lot of money is being pumped in there, while the traditional VC ecosystem might actually go into a kind of a downward spiral.
Again, your guess is as good as mine, but I would say many of these ecosystems, in terms of capital, so all of these ecosystems are frankly tied at the hip. So public markets are tied at the hip today with private markets. That was not as much the case 10 or 20 years ago. But the feedback between each of these ecosystems is very fast, and the linkages between each of these ecosystems is very high today. So if I was a founder building in sort of the crypto ecosystem or the Web3 ecosystem, I would assume, or I would have the same set of assumptions that someone building in SaaS or fintech or edtech and so on would make, right? Capital availability is likely going to look very similar. And because these ecosystems, sure, there could be a lag, there could be a sort of a lag or a lead, but all of these ecosystems are tied at the hip. Ultimately, the way markets think about it, there's growth equities and then there's debt equities. If interest rates rise, things move out of growth equities and into safer havens, right? And for all intents and purposes, the way LPs and limited partners and the likes think about any of these assets, they're all growth equity assets for them, right? Which basically thrive in an environment of near zero interest rates. But if interest rates are much higher, you would rather park your money in much safer bets, which are basically
Makes sense.
so I would say all of these are tied. If I was advising a crypto founder, make the same set of assumptions that any other founder in the ecosystem will make. Build a quality business, focus on fundamentals, don't burn ridiculous amounts of capital, and build a business, right, with profit margins and the likes. That would be my focus.
Thanks a lot for your time. How was your experience, Ruchin?
I loved it. I had a great time. Really appreciated all the conversations and the questions. So I had a great time. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot, Ruchin. So that was the episode, guys. अगर आप एक SaaS फाउंडर है तो इनमें से कौन कौन सी चीजें आपको इंपॉर्टेंट लगी, जो आपको लगता है कि आप अपने स्टार्टअप में यूज कर सकते हैं, प्लीज कमेंट सेक्शन में हमें डेफिनेटली बताइए. और हाँ, प्लीज लाइक, शेयर एंड सब्सक्राइब. शेयर करिए अपने सारे स्टार्टअप फाउंडर्स के साथ जो कि अभी एक SaaS प्रोडक्ट बना रहे हैं, और ये एपिसोड डेफिनेटली उनके काम आएगा. और हाँ, अगर आप में से कोई स्टार्टअप बना रहा है तो प्लीज आप मुझे रीच आउट कर सकते हैं इंस्टाग्राम पे या ट्विटर पे. द लिंक ऑफ माई बायो इज ऑल्सो इन द डिस्क्रिप्शन. मैं मिलता हूं आपसे अगले एपिसोड में. टिल देन, अपवर्ड्स एंड ऑनवर्ड्स. सी यू.